Hello, I'm Martin from Celebrity Reptiles, and today's program is aimed at you if you're thinking of buying your first pet reptile. So, if you'd like to learn more about the specialized housing, husbandry, diet, and everything else that goes into owning a reptile, plus the chance to meet some ideal first-time reptiles and one or two that you really don't want to keep unless you have a little bit more experience, stay tuned to today's edition of Celebrity Reptiles Bite-Sized TV. So, you're thinking of buying your very first pet reptile. Well, think again. It's a little bit costly, it's a very big commitment. Let's see what goes into owning a reptile before you even think exactly what animal you want to bring home. Let's go through some of the basics that will apply whether you end up with a snake, a lizard, or maybe even a tortoise. First of all, you've got to think about housing. Now, with reptiles, we call them a vivarium. That's made of wood with some sliding glass doors, just to give you the technical bit. Or it could be a terrarium. Now, the terrarium is just the same thing. It's a house for a reptile or an amphibian, but it's made of glass. Now, depending on your setup at home, you might think, I'd like a glass terrarium. They look rather neat in my front room. You might just go for the conventional wooden vivarium. Whichever you choose, be prepared to spend something between 90 and maybe £150, depending on which design you go for. So that's the first item on today's shopping list. So we've made our choice on vivarium, we've splashed out a few bob, and we need now to equip that vivarium. First item we need is lighting, because many reptiles actually need UV lighting, ultraviolet lighting. It's what everybody, it's what we and they use to assimilate the calcium in their food in order to build good, strong teeth and bones. Now, to provide it in a reptile's enclosure, the easiest way is to use a UV lighting tube. Much the same as the lighting tube you'd put into a fish tank, except that it had some very special rays to help our reptiles. That tube in turn will be connected to a fluorescent lighting tube controller. Those two items together could set you back probably another £35 or so. So that's item number 2 on our shopping list. Item number 3 on our list is heating. Now, this is especially important when keeping reptiles because, unlike us, a reptile can't control its own body heat. It doesn't have inbuilt central heating. Unlike us, if we get too hot, we sweat, and so we get rid of our excess body temperature. If we get too cold, we shiver, and by shivering, what's actually going on? Our muscles are all rubbing together inside our bodies, which help to warm us up. The reptiles can't do any of this, so they're reliant on outside sources of heat. In the wild, it would be obviously the sun, or they might soak up some heat from a slate or a rock. Then they move in and out of warmer and cooler areas. It's as simple as that. A very basic thermostat. They'll move to warmer and cooler areas to keep their body temperature just right. So to achieve this for them in their vivarium, we need to give them a hot end and a cooler end. That means that they've got a complete temperature gradient from the highest point they need down to the lowest point, and they'll find their most comfortable point in their vivarium throughout their day. They'll go about their business, eating, feeding, sleeping, but all the time moving around to keep themselves comfortable. So, by the time we buy maybe a heat mat, it might be a ceramic lamp and holder, but the most important thing, whichever method we go for, is a thermostat. You must have perfect control over your heating, so you can get everything just right. Vivarium's in place, it's heated and it's lighted. Now we need to think about decorating it for our reptile. First thing we need to do is to put in a floor covering, a substrate. And there's various choices for this. We could use orchid bark chip, we could use a savanna bark chip, a dark wood or a light wood. We might go for compressed grass pellet. We could even go for a bit of newspaper if you just want to be very simple and very functional and easy to clean. But most of us want to make the vivarium look just right for the animal. So a bag of substrate, let's say about £10 on our list. It might last you 2 or 3 clean outs, but it's still an extra item and an extra cost. In order to create the perfect reptile environment, you can see we're using quite a few electrical bits and pieces. Now, these all cost money to run. We've paid a few bob out to buy them in the first place, but because we're running them off the 13-amp ring main at home, it's going to cost us a bit more. You'll have to have a look at what you're paying for your electric to give yourself an idea of how much that might cost over the space of 6 months or a year. It shouldn't be too expensive, but it's still something that you need to keep in mind. One last thing to consider for our list is food. The reptile's diet is very varied. It may be herbivorous, that means it's a vegetarian. Well, that's pretty straightforward. Lovely fruit and veg that we can get from the supermarket or the local shop, that's easy enough. However, it might be a carnivore. Now, in the world of reptiles, if an animal is a carnivore, it generally eats insects. It's an insectivore. But it may be a true carnivore and eat nothing but mice and chicks. You've got to think about having all those lovely frozen chicks and mice in your freezer. In terms of cost, you'd need to check your local suppliers, but it's worth thinking about, is my animal going to be a meat eater? Because if he is, all that food is going to be stored in your freezer. So there you have it. That's the items we need before we even think of going and buying a reptile. So we've got housing, we've got lighting, we've got heating. The list mounts up. So now we have a grand total of well, it's all very well having a full-grown corn snake at around about 5 feet, maybe 6 foot, if you go by the books. But that's a little bit different to a full-grown boa constrictor. Seisha here is 10 years old, and she's around about 10 feet and pretty heavy with it. So first-time buyers quite often see these 30 centimetre, really cute baby boa constrictors in a pet shop and think, I've got to have one of those. Well, just remember, at the end of the day, in about 5 years' time, when she's fully grown, you're going to have up to 12 feet of snake to cope with. So think again. This is Mumps. He's not an ideal first-time lizard. He's a black and white Argentine tegu. Tegus are the South American equivalent to the monitor lizards. So as you can guess, very big lizards indeed. He's not fully grown by a long chalk. Add to that the fact that he likes to eat fully grown rats and mice. I don't know if you can handle that. Probably the most ideal first-time pet snake has to be the North American corn snake. This is one of ours. This is Layla, and Layla is a very big favourite at some of our live events. As you can see, Layla, like most corn snakes, is very laid back, very easygoing. She's not fast-moving, easily manageable. And as for size, she's not over long. The books will tell you that a corn snake can reach about 6 feet, but it's very rare. The problem is the snakes don't read the books. However, they're not a very fat snake, so they never become unmanageable. So that's your corn snake, an ideal first-time snake. Meet Leonie, the leopard gecko. She is probably the ideal first-time pet reptile. But there is a downside. You've got to be prepared to feed a lizard like Leonie live bugs and creepy crawlies, and in her case that means crickets and locusts, possibly a few mealworms, but live insects nonetheless. What do you think? Can you handle it? So some of you might be thinking of investing in a tortoise as your first time reptile pet. That's a great idea, but remember, pick the right tortoise, because as you'll see in some of our later videos, when we look at specific animals, some of them need some very in-depth care and attention. But if you pick the right one, you can have a great pet for life. How about this guy? He's a Hermann's tortoise from Southern Europe, and believe it or not, this guy here is only 2 years old. He's grown wonderfully. Although when he grows up, he's only going to end up at about 8 or 10 inches in length, so not over big, and a great pet tortoise. On the other hand, this is Roger, and Roger is what we call a leopard tortoise because of his coloration and his patterning. Roger gets a little bit bigger. He ends up around about 15 inches long with a lovely high domed shell. So there you have it. A couple of choices for you to think over as to what you might like for your first time pet reptile. But before you rush out and buy, plan everything. Research your choice of animal so you know everything you need to know, what they'll want, how long they live, how big they're going to get, how big their housing will need to be when they become an adult. Make sure you know the answers to all these questions. And then just a thought, up here you can see some contact details for Dwarf. They're the Dangerous Wild Animal Rescue Facility based in Essex. Please give them a call, speak to Ian there, tell him it's going to be your first time reptile, tell him you've researched the subject thoroughly and you're interested in a corn snake, a leopard gecko, a bearded dragon, whatever it might be. But please consider the idea of taking on a rescued animal. See you next time on Celebrity Reptiles Bite Size TV.